There's a man in a candlelit room down at Esalen, and he has a woman's bare foot in his hands. He is running his fingers along the sole of it, slow, careful, the way you'd feel for a coin under a rug. And he stops at the big toe. He presses, and he closes his eyes, and he says, very softly, I think I feel it. I feel a kind of dent. Right here. Is that the pituitary? Now I want you to understand, this fellow is not joking. He is dead serious. He believes that little knuckle of bone at the far end of her foot is wired straight up through her body, like a telephone line to a gland tucked behind her eyes. That's reflexology. That's the teaching. And the room, a whole room of grown, intelligent adults, nodded along like he just said the sun comes up in the morning. And I sat there, and I was floored. Not because it was clever, because it was so calm, and so sure, and so completely wrong. There is no wire. There is no dent in the toe that reports upstairs to the pituitary gland. You could press on that toe until the cows come home, and you would not touch that gland, you would not read it, you would not feel it, because the thing simply is not connected the way he thinks it is. It overwhelmed me, honestly, the confidence of it. Here was a man feeling something that wasn't there, and calling it knowledge. So let me just say the wrong idea plainly, and let it sit in the room a minute because it deserves that much before I take it apart. The idea is this. Your foot is a little map of your whole body. Every organ has an address on it. Liver here, kidney there, sinuses up in the tips of the toes, and the big toe, that's the head, the brain, the master gland. And by pressing the map, you reach the territory. Squeeze the toe, and something behind the eyes wakes up. It's a beautiful idea in a way. It's tidy. The whole messy human being folded up and printed small onto the bottom of one foot, so a person with good hands can play you like a keyboard. It's completely wrong. And I can show you why, and better than that, I can show you something the man in that room never suspected, which is that he had his hands on the single most important part of the foot for keeping that woman from falling flat on her face, and he had absolutely no idea. He was massaging the right toe for reasons that were pure fantasy. The real reason is stranger, and harder, and is written down in careful measurements, and nobody in that candlelight was talking about it. Because here is the twist that gets me every time. That toe he was fondling for made-up mysticism actually does hold something close to your life in its two small bones. Not your pituitary, your balance. Stiffen that toe, bend it out of shape, or take it off, and your whole body's ability to stand up straight starts to come apart at the seams. There's no magic in it. There's torque, and there's a lever, and there's a bundle of tiny sensors, and there's a pendulum that spends every second of your waking life trying to fall over. And that pendulum, I'm sorry to tell you, is you. Let me convince you of the pendulum first, because everything else hangs off it. I want you to do something. Stand up, or imagine standing up, nice and still, feet a comfortable distance apart, and just be quiet. You feel steady, right? Solid. Planted. That feeling is a lie. A gorgeous, useful lie your brain tells you so you can get on with your day. Because you are not solid at all. You are a tall, top-heavy stack of bones balanced on two little hinges down at the ankles, and most of your weight, your chest, your arms, your head, that heavy bowling ball of a head, all of it is sitting up high, way above those hinges. Think about what that means. If I asked you to balance a broomstick on your palm, standing straight up, bristles at the top, you know exactly how that goes. It doesn't want to stay up. The moment it leans a hair off vertical, gravity grabs the top and pulls it over, and it goes faster and faster the more it leans. That's an unstable thing. It has no interest in standing. It wants to lie down, and you have to chase it around with your hand every instant to keep it up. Well, that broomstick is a fair picture of you. In the trade, they call it an inverted pendulum. A regular pendulum hangs down from its pivot, and it's happy it swings back to the bottom if you nudge it. Turn it upside down, put the heavy end on top and the pivot at the bottom, and now it's the opposite of happy. Now every little lean is an invitation to disaster. And where's your pivot? Down at the ankle. Roughly. The people who measure these things, and they do measure them carefully in laboratories, they model quiet standing as almost exactly this: a pendulum pivoting at the ankle. They even put a number on the length, the distance from the ankle up to where your body's weight effectively concentrates, your center of mass. In one careful study, they found that length came out to about 0.97 meters, give or take a few centimeters. Just under a meter. So picture a meter-long broomstick with a good chunk of the weight up top teetering on a hinge at the floor. That's the machine we're talking about. Now here's why that matters, and I want you to sit with the numbers, because the numbers are where the fear lives. Your center of mass, that heavy point, doesn't sit neatly over the ankle. It sits above it and a little bit forward of it. So gravity is always pulling you into a topple. There's a constant twisting force, a torque trying to rotate you face first toward the ground. It never rests. It never takes a coffee break. Every second you stand there feeling solid, gravity is leaning on you, and something in you is leaning back exactly as hard, no more, no less, and if that something ever quits for even a moment, down you go. How fine is that balancing act? Some folks did a lovely experiment where they had people balance a real inverted pendulum, a machine center of mass held up about 0.94 meters above the pivot, close to body-sized. And they watched how much the thing was allowed to sway. The answer is almost nothing. The sway stayed within something like 0.5 degree to 5.5 degrees of straight up, and the corrections the person fed in, the little nudges of torque to keep it from falling, those stayed within about plus or minus 1 Newton meter. 1 Newton meter. That's a gentle thing. That's about the twist you'd feel holding a small apple out at the end of a short ruler. Meanwhile, the machine's own eagerness to topple was around 10 Newton meters for every single degree it tilted. Do you hear that? The thing wants to fall with 10 units of force per degree, and you're holding it up, keeping it inside a few degrees, with whispers of correction around 1 unit. You are threading a needle constantly, and you don't even know you're doing it. That's what standing is. It looks like nothing. It's the most boring thing a person does. And underneath, it's a frantic, delicate, unceasing act of catching yourself before you fall thousands of times so smoothly that you get to believe the comfortable lie that you're just standing there. So how do you do it? What's actually leaning back against gravity? Most of the time, for quiet standing, for the small stuff, it's your ankles. They call it the ankle strategy, which is a plain enough name. When your weight drifts too far forward, the muscles around the ankle fire and generate a corrective torque in the other direction. And here's the clever part of it. That torque shifts where your foot presses on the ground. It moves the center of pressure, the single point that represents all the push between your sole and the floor. It slides that point forward ahead of your falling weight, and by pressing harder out there, it breaks your center of mass and shoves it back before it can escape. Escape from where? From your base of support. That's the patch of ground your feet cover, plus the little bit between them, the footprint you're standing on. As long as your weight, projected straight down, stays inside that footprint, you can catch yourself. Let it wander past the edge, past the front of your toes, and no ankle in the world can save you. Now you have to step, or grab something, or fall. So the whole game of standing is keeping that pressure point and that falling weight corralled inside a patch of ground only so big, with a margin measured not in feet but in centimeters. Small perturbations, small drifts, the ankle handles it quietly. Only when something big shoves you do you throw the hips into it, or take a stumbling step. For the ordinary business of not falling over while you brush your teeth, it's the ankle trading torque, sliding that point of pressure around under your feet like a man rolling a marble in his palm to keep it from going off the edge of the table. And now you should be asking the question I've been steering you toward this whole time. If the pressure point under your foot is the thing that saves you, if the front edge of that little patch of ground is where salvation lives or dies, then what sits at the very front edge? What's out there, right at the frontier, right where your weight is always trying to escape? Your toes. And the biggest of them, the one that carries the most, the one that fellow at Esalen was squeezing for all the wrong reasons, is standing guard at exactly the place where falling begins. So let me take that toe apart, not with a knife, with an idea. And the first thing it does will surprise you, because it isn't soft at all. It's a piece of machinery. There's an old bit of engineering described by a fellow named Hicks back in 1954, and he borrowed the name from sailors. A windlass. That's the crank and drum they use to haul up an anchor, winding a rope around a barrel so a little turn of the handle pulls a heavy load. Your foot has one. The rope is a tough sheet of tissue running along the bottom of your foot, from the heel forward to the base of the toes. The drum is the knuckle of your big toe, that joint where the toe meets the foot. And here is the pretty part. When you push off to take a step, your big toe bends upward. It has to. And as it bends up, it winds that sheet of tissue around the joint like rope around a barrel. The rope goes tight. And when it goes tight, it pulls the heel and the ball of the foot toward each other, and the arch of your foot lifts and locks. Think about what that means. A moment ago, your foot was a loose, floppy, forgiving thing, a bag of bones that molds itself over a rock or a curb. Then the toe bends, the windlass wins, the rope snaps tight, and that same floppy bag becomes a stiff, rigid lever, a plank you can shove the whole planet away with. Soft when you need soft, hard when you need hard, and the switch that flips it is the angle of one toe. Nobody designed this in a committee. It just works. And people have measured it, because that's what you do if you're serious instead of dreamy. They watch the arch rise as the toe bends. Sitting down, the top of the arch lifts about 6.5 millimeters. Standing still, a little less, around 5.5. But walking, when it's actually doing its job at push-off, the arch jumps up about 11 millimeters. Twice as much. And it isn't a straight line relationship either. Per degree that the toe bends, you get about 0.4 of a millimeter of arch rise during a real stride, against maybe 0.2 when you're just standing there posing for the instrument. The mechanism doesn't merely work harder when you walk. It works differently, steeper, more eager, exactly when the load arrives. That's not a decoration on the body. That's a lever that builds itself out of a slack rope, on demand, several times a second, and you have never once thought about it. All right, that's the toe as a strut, as a crank, as a piece of the skeleton doing honest mechanical work. Now I'm going to tell you the second thing it does, and this one is sneakier, because it has nothing to do with bones and levers at all. The bottom of your foot is not just leather to walk on. It is wallpapered, top to bottom, wall to wall, with little pressure sensors. Nerve endings that fire when they're squeezed, and they are packed thickest right where you'd want a good guard to stand, along the edges of the foot and out under the toes. They don't feel pain particularly, and they don't feel temperature. What they report, continuously without a break, is pressure. How hard and where. Which means the sole of your foot is a living map that is forever telling your brain exactly where that little point of pressure sits and how close it's drifting to the dangerous edge. Now watch how good this system is, because the number is going to sound like a misprint. Some people took elite women handball players, 14 of them, athletes, people with superb balance already, and under each big toe they slipped a thin, rigid insert. How thin? 0.8 of 1 millimeter. Less than a millimeter. A shim you could barely feel with your fingertips. And they measured how much these athletes swayed while standing on a force plate. With that sliver under the toes, the area their pressure point wandered over shrank from about 174 square millimeters down to about 149. And the speed of that wandering dropped too, from roughly 8 millimeters per second down to about 7. Less than a millimeter of extra push under one toe, and the whole standing body got measurably quieter, steadier, stiller. Not because the shim propped anything up, it's far too thin to prop. Because it woke up the senses. It gave those pressure endings under the toe a little more to talk about, and the nervous system, hearing them more clearly, did a better job holding the line. So think of what we've got now. The same toe is two completely different instruments at once. It's a lever that stiffens your foot into a plank. And it's a dynamometer, a pressure gauge, reporting from the exact frontier where falling begins. Muscle and nerve, push and listen, both converging on one knuckle at the front of your foot, and I promise you the man at Esalen, rubbing that toe and dreaming about a lady's pituitary gland, had no idea he was holding the single, most instrumented, most mechanically clever square inch of the entire foot. He was right that the big toe is special. He was just wrong about every single reason why. Now, when you want to know what a part really does, there's a brutal old method, and biology uses it all the time. Take it away and see what breaks. So they did, not with an axe. They simply constrained the great toe, tied it down, wouldn't let it play its part on 30 healthy young women, average age about 22. And here's the telling thing. When those women stood on 2 feet, flat and easy, nothing much changed. The system had margin to spare. But stand them on one leg, the hard case, the case with no margin, and the sway got worse. Faster, sloppier, both with the eyes open and with the eyes closed. And when they had to shift their weight forward and back, rocking to the edge of control, their command over the direction of that motion fell apart. Pin the toe, and the balance that depended on it quietly degrades, precisely in the situations that were already near the edge. Push it further to the hard evidence, the kind nobody wants to volunteer for. There is some data, and I'll be honest with you that it's thinner and less certain than I'd like, on people who have actually lost a great toe to amputation. And the story it tells fits. On the side that lost the toe, the pressure point moves differently, less controlled. Single leg balance with the eyes closed gets worse on that side. The peak pressure that the toe used to carry gets dumped backward onto the knuckle behind it, the head of the first long bone of the foot. And the forward and sideways shove of push-off, the very thing the windlass was built to deliver, weakens. I want you to hold that one loosely, because the numbers behind it are few and the study small, but it points the same direction as everything sturdier we've seen. There's even a measurement, again on the softer end of the evidence, that during ordinary walking the big toe carries roughly twice the peak pressure of all 4 of the little toes put together. 1 toe against 4, and the one wins 2-1. That is not a passenger. That is the engine. And now let me bring this down out of the laboratory and into a place you actually know, because you have seen this deformity. You may be standing on it right now. A bunion. The doctors call it hallux valgus, which only means the big toe has drifted sideways, angling in toward its neighbors, and the joint at its base pushes out into a bump. It looks like a cosmetic nuisance. A shoe problem. Something for the vanity, not the survival. But follow the physics. If the toe is bent off its line, then the windlass can't win cleanly. The lever doesn't lock the way it should, and the sensors out at the frontier are no longer sitting square where the weight escapes. So what happens to balance? They looked. 80 women, sorted by how bad the drift had gotten, from none to mild to moderate to severe, and they put them all on a balance machine that scores how much you wobble, standing still and moving. The mild cases, the moderate cases, they held up reasonably. But the severe ones, where the toe had swung more than 40 degrees off true, those women wobbled dramatically more than the ones with straight toes. Standing quietly, their instability score was about 3 times worse. And when the platform made them work, made them chase their balance in motion, it was worse by a factor of 3 again, with the sway running faster whether their eyes were open or shut. The people who ran that study came to a flat conclusion, and it's not a gentle one. A severe bunion is not a cosmetic matter. It is on its own an independent risk factor for falling down. The lever bent, and the fall risk rose right along with it, step by step, the worse the bend got. So sit with the shape of what we've built here. We started in a room where a man squeezed a toe and imagined he could feel a gland deep in a woman's skull. And I told you that was nonsense. And it is. There is no secret wire from your toe to your pituitary. But while we were busy laughing at the fairy tale, look at what the plain, measured, unmagical truth turned out to be. The one place on your whole body where the failure of balance is decided. A rope and drum machine that turns a soft foot into a rigid plank on demand. A field of pressure sensors so sharp that less than a millimeter of stimulation quiets an athlete's sway. And the evidence, from constraint and from loss, and from that sideways drifting bunion, all pointing at the same stubborn fact. And here is the part I love, because it turns the whole joke inside out. The man in that room wanted magic. He wanted a hidden thread running from the tip of a toe up into the deep machinery of the skull, and he pressed and he felt a little dent, and he told himself the universe had whispered a secret to his fingers. It hadn't. But standing 3 feet away, if he had only known where to look, was a piece of engineering stranger than anything he was inventing. He was rubbing the single most important square inch of the human balance system, and he had no idea. He was holding the tiller and calling it a divining rod. Let me put the pieces back on the table one more time all together now so you feel the weight of them at once. Your body is a tall, top-heavy thing balanced on two small hinges at the ankles. Gravity does not leave it alone for a single second. It is an inverted pendulum, and an inverted pendulum wants to fall. It is falling all the time in tiny amounts, first this way, then that way, and something is catching it, over and over, with corrections so small and so constant you never notice the work being done. In that pendulum experiment, the toppling pull was more than 10 Newton meters for every single degree of tilt, and the correcting nudges from the ankle stayed inside about 1 Newton meter. That is a gentle hand steering a heavy load. And the hand needs to know which way the load is drifting before it can steer. It needs information, fast, honest, continuous information about where your weight sits over your feet. Where does that information come from? From the ground pressing up into you. From the skin of the sole, and above all from the front edge of the foot, from that big toe packed with pressure sensors reporting the shape and the size and the slow migration of the patch of pressure under you. When the weight creeps toward the front edge, toward the toes, that is the early warning that you are about to run out of foot, that the center of pressure is sliding toward the limit of the base you are standing on. The toe is not just holding you up, it is telling you where the cliff edge is. And when you dull that report, when you numb the sole or cool it, balance gets worse. When you sharpen it, with less than a millimeter of stimulation under the great toes, the sway of a trained athlete gets measurably quieter. The center of pressure area shrank, the speed of the drift dropped. A sliver of pressure, thinner than a coin, and the nervous system stood you a little more still. Then there is the other job, the mechanical one, and this is the part that ought to make you look down at your own foot with a bit of respect. When you push off to take a step, the big toe bends up, and as it bends it winds a rope. The plantar fascia, that thick band along the bottom of the foot, wraps around the joint at the base of the toe like a cable around a drum, and bending the toe pulls the cable tight. Pull the cable and the arch lifts, and the whole loose, floppy, forgiving foot snaps into a rigid plank. During walking, the arch can rise by roughly 11 millimeters as the toe dorsiflexes, and it rises faster and faster the more the toe bends, not in a straight line but a curve. About 0.4 of a millimeter of lift for every degree of bend in the middle of a stride. So the very last thing your foot does before it throws you forward is to stiffen itself into a lever, and the switch that stiffens it is the big toe. Soft when it needs to be soft, hard exactly when it needs to be hard, and the toe throws the switch. Now do you see what nature has done? It has taken 3 completely different problems and solved all 3 at the same corner of the body. The problem of standing still without toppling, the problem of knowing moment to moment where your weight is, and the problem of turning a cushioned, shock-absorbing foot into a stiff pole to launch off. Torque, sensing, and leverage, 3 different kinds of physics, and they all converge on one joint the size of a marble. That is not mysticism. That is far better than mysticism, because it is true, and you can measure it, and when you take the toe away, the measurements change in exactly the direction the story predicts. And they do change. Bind that toe so it cannot move, and quiet standing on 2 feet looks fine, no difference at all. But ask a person to balance on one leg and the sway velocity climbs, eyes open and eyes closed both, and the fine control of leaning forward and back gets sloppier. The lever is jammed, the sensor is muffled, and the body wobbles. The amputation data, and I will tell you honestly this is the thinnest evidence we have, points the same way. Take the toe off entirely, and the balance on that side, especially with the eyes shut, suffers, and the load that used to ride through the toe piles up behind it on the head of the first long bone of the foot, and the forward push weakens. I hold that finding a little loosely, because the numbers behind it are few, but it leans the same direction as everything sturdier, and when the weak evidence and the strong evidence lean the same way, you start to believe the lean. And then the bunion closes the case, quietly, without drama. You do not have to cut anything off. You only have to let the joint drift crooked, Let that big toe wander sideways year after year and watch. The stability scores get worse in a clean, dose-dependent march, a little worse with a mild deformity, worse still with moderate, and markedly worse when the angle passes 40 degrees. The sway rises, the control drops, eyes open and eyes closed. And the people who measured it came to a conclusion I want you to hear plainly. Because it is not a metaphor and it is not a flourish. A severe crooked big toe is, on its own, an independent reason that an older person falls. Not the hip, not the eyes, not the inner ear. The toe. So here is where the argument leaves us, and I want you to notice how completely it turned around. We began with a man who believed the foot was a map of the whole body, a switchboard of secret organ lines, and I told you that was a fairy tale, and it is. There is no wire from the toe to the pituitary. But he was groping clumsily, dishonestly, toward a real thing he could not see. The foot is not a map of your organs. It is something better. It is the place where your whole upright existence is quietly negotiated with the planet, second by second, a running argument between gravity, which wants you down, and a small joint at the front of your foot, which keeps talking you out of it. He wanted the toe to be a receiver for hidden messages. He never noticed it was already broadcasting the only message that matters, the one that says which way you are falling and how to catch yourself in time. We laughed at the magic, and the magic was a distraction. The plain truth was standing there the whole time, unglamorous and enormous, written in Newton meters and millimeters and the honest wobble of a person on one leg. The next time you rise up on your toes to reach a high shelf, or you catch yourself on an icy step and do not go down, think for 1 second about that small, crooked, overlooked bit of you doing 3 impossible jobs at once and asking for no credit. You spend your life standing on a knife edge and calling it solid ground, and the thing that keeps you on the right side of the edge is the last part of you that you would ever have suspected.